area here. On the other hand, if we're in this situation, then the price control is going to lead things to move way too much, right? We go here rather than here, and we get this big loss in the squiggly area rather than the small loss that we would get out of the quantity control. Intuitively, the social optimum that gets traced out as these curves move is going to look kind of flat if the marginal social cost is elastic relative to the marginal social benefit. And it's going to look very steep in the other case. And what we want is that whatever control we put on looks like the path of what's socially optimal. And so because we have this quadratic loss function, all that matters, right, is the how close each of these, q star plus epsilon or q star, is to what is actually socially optimal. That's what I was just talking about. We want the path of socially optimal things to look like the path that's traced out by the control that we put on. And that is going to be closer, the price control is going to be closer if this thing is closer to 1 than it is to 0, because we get 0 responsiveness here, and we get full responsiveness here. And that depends on whether A or B is greater, right? So if A is greater, if the private value is more inelastic, we're going to want to put on a price control. And if the social value is more inelastic, we're going to want to put on a quantity control. And I think that that can help us understand why we use different systems for controlling different types of things. So for externalities that are very local, right, something where I just hurt you, that doesn't accumulate over the country as a whole, right? It doesn't make any difference whether I hurt Mike by playing my music too loud, whether Chrissy would hurt Carl more by playing her music too loud. They're not related to each other. And so those should be dealt with just with litigation, right? With like suing someone. Whereas, something like smoking should probably be dealt with a tax, because even though it might accumulate a little bit over a city, the cost to any individual person who's addicted of mitigating their smoking is really, really high. So you wouldn't want to put a cap over the country as a whole, because it wouldn't respond to what people are doing. Or another example is antibiotics. You don't know how much people are going to need antibiotics. There's some harm that's created by having people using antibiotics, because it can cause mutation in the underlying disease. But that doesn't really, but if there's suddenly a disease and you have a cap on the amount of antibiotics, that's going to be disastrous for the country as a whole, right? So you want to put a tax on it so that if there's a bunch of demand, we can serve that. On the other hand, when you have congestion on a road, it's kind of crazy to just put a tax on that, because we know congestion increases dramatically when you get past a certain level. Like when you're just going along and there's not too many people on the road, there's almost no harm. And so why would you want to keep people out? But once you get past a certain level, it gets terrible. So it's much better to regulate the total number of cars on the road rather than to have a tax. Okay. So I'm not really going to have time to talk about the Coase theorem. I don't think it's very interesting, honestly. But the basic argument of the Coase theorem is that people could just get together with each other if I'm causing an externality to you, and we could work out an agreement, and that would solve the problem. If there was no costs of finding all the people who I'm causing the externality to, and no cost of us reaching an agreement, and we had as good of information as anyone else had. And the reason that that's so nutty as an argument is that usually most externalities affect all sorts of people. So imagine we were trying to do this for climate change. Every time I drove my car, I'd have to get together with every single other person in the world and work out with them exactly how much they were going to be harmed by me driving my car. And we'd have to find every scientist who could actually tell us how much they would be affected. And we'd have to take into account all the uncertainty, do the whole Kyoto negotiation every time I wanted to drive my car, right? So the reality is that the real problem in externality is figuring out who knows the relevant information about what the price should be. And sometimes that will be just me and you if you're annoying me with your music, and maybe we could work out a good bargain there. But if it's something that affects the whole world through all sorts of complicated scientific mechanisms, it would be crazy to have people just bargain based on that. And furthermore, if bargaining solves problems, then it doesn't matter that we put a Pigouvian tax and the government comes in and intervenes, because we can always bargain away if we put in the right tax, right? Wrong tax. So coming in and incorporating information through centralized taxes can never make those things worse, because the bargaining process can always solve them. So really, the problem of externalities is not about just whether the government should be involved or not. The real question is who should be determining what's the externality in any given case. Sometimes that's local information, in which case we're going to have to use, it's going to be much harder to use something like the Kyoto process and scientific analysis, but sometimes it's big scientific effects that are going to do it, and then you really want to get a bunch of scientists together in a room and try to figure out what the effects of any given action and set a more centralized tax. So the key question is not government versus non-government, but who is the right person to figure out what the harms that are being caused are. And that's what the next class is going to be all about. How do we get the information that we need to solve externality problems? Thanks, guys. Sorry I ran a little over.